want to go live to Boston, where authorities are updating the media on a shooting earlier today. A man identified as Usama Rahim was shot and killed by police and an FBI agent after he lunged at them with a knife. He was under surveillance by terrorism investigators at the time. Let's listen in.
District Attorney Dan Conley, Reverend Mark Scott, Superintendent O'Rourke, Superintendent Chief Ross, and FBI agent in charge of the Boston area, Vince Lisi. At approximately 7:18 today, our officers, in conjunction with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, were involved in a surveillance of a known suspect wanted for some terrorist-related information that we had received. As a result of that information, our officers approached the individual for questioning. The officers were unarmed. They hadn't had their guns out. At that point, the suspect in question came at the officers. We have video depicting this individual coming at officers while the officers are retreating. The individual in question has what can be described as a large military knife. The officers are retreating, and that's from the video we have available as well as witnesses' account. And they kept retreating, verbally giving commands to drop the weapon, and at some point the individual proximity came close that the officers were in danger, their lives were in danger, when two officers discharged their weapons. The individual, from what I understand, initially has been obviously deceased. He was hit with what we believe 2 shots, one to the torso and one to the abdomen. He's been identified as Usama Rahim, a 26-year-old male who resides in Rosendale. Again, it's an active investigation. We really can't go into too much detail. Again, it's an investigation that's been going on for some time by the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And, again, I've always said it's a difficult part of our job when we have to take a life, but clearly in these circumstances, both the FBI and the Boston Police did everything they could possibly do to get this individual to drop his knife, and at some point, unfortunately, we had to take his life. So at that point, I'm going to turn it over to District Attorney Dan Conley, who's going to answer questions about the death investigation, and then FBI Director Vince Lisi is going to entertain some questions regarding the FBI's role, and then we'll open up for some questions, okay? Yeah, and this is the knife that was used, and I can put it up here. I don't know how, Michael, you want to hold that? That's the particular knife that the officers were retreating and was recovered from the scene. Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much, Commissioner. As Commissioner Evans mentioned, my name's Dan Conley. I'm the District Attorney here in Suffolk County. Whenever there is a sudden or unnatural death that occurs in Suffolk County, Assistant District Attorneys respond to the scene as well and conduct an investigation. It is our role to direct these investigations, and this is no different whether it's a police-involved shooting or otherwise. So this morning, shortly after the incident occurred, of course, we did respond. I responded myself to the scene and began the investigation into the death of the individual who expired in Rosendale earlier this morning. Our role, the role of the District Attorney, is to determine whether or not the law enforcement officers involved who exercised, in this case, deadly force, did so with justification, either in self-defense or in defense of others. Well, that investigation is just beginning. I've assigned my first Assistant District Attorney, Patrick Hagan, to lead that investigation along with the Boston Police Firearms Discharge Investigation Team under the direction of Superintendent Greg Long and Deputy Superintendent John Brown. I have every confidence that they'll do an excellent investigation along with Assistant DA Pat Hagan and Ed Zabin. I also want to thank Special Agent in Charge Vincent Lisi this morning when I arrived at the scene. You know, sometimes there's cross-jurisdictional things. We're not used to this. When we have a police-involved shooting, it's typically either Boston Police or Revere Police or something like that. This is an FBI. A couple of FBI agents were involved, and he pledged his full cooperation with our investigation, as Commissioner Evans and I have pledged our full cooperation with his investigation. So I want to thank him. I think this, in part, what makes Boston unique is that we're able to work through these cross-jurisdictional issues quite well. So, you know, as always with these cases, we do a thorough, complete, and comprehensive investigation. Already, the crime scene has been canvassed and evidence has been taken. Witnesses have been spoken to, identified and spoken to. Video has been ascertained, as the Commissioner said. Probably go back and do this a couple more times to make sure that we leave no stone unturned so that we can determine precisely what happened. At the conclusion of this investigation, as I always do, I'll issue an extensive report on our findings and apply the law of Massachusetts to determine that question whether the officers were justified. As always, again, as is my practice, the entire investigative file will be open to the public, to you, the media, and to the family of the deceased in this case. I've also assigned the chief of our Victim Witness Advocacy Program to interface with this family. We've already had some contact with them regarding, for example, the expediting of the processing of his body so that his body can be released for burial for religious purposes. So that basically is how it's going to be run down. We don't do things by a clock here. We do them by complete thoroughness, but most importantly, through transparency. And as the police commissioner said, it's important that the public know that the officers approached this individual without their firearms drawn. They were attempting to conduct what we call in the law a threshold inquiry, a questioning, and it was this deceased person this person who drew that knife that the commissioner showed. And we saw the video. It appears that the law enforcement officers were backing away before they exercise deadly force. No judgment is being made at this point now. I'd say that we'll do a complete and thorough investigation, and we'll let you know the results of that, and of course, in due time. So with that, I will turn it over to Special Agent in Charge of the Boston Office of the FBI, Vincent Lisi, for some comments.
Thank you very much. I'll just echo what the district attorney said, is that we will work closely with them, and the FBI has its own process for investigating whenever an agent discharges his weapon. And part of that process is for an independent team to respond here from Washington, D.C., right, to determine whether or not the agent acted in conjunction with the Department of Justice's use of deadly force. So we will work side by side with the district attorney's office and to make sure that, again, our investigation is transparent to him. And then our findings are then released to the Department of Justice, who again reviews them to make sure that the agent's discharge of the weapon was in conjunction with the policy. Regarding the investigation of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, I'm not going to be able to answer any questions about that. All I can tell you is that the subject had been under 24-hour surveillance. This investigation has been worked side by side from minute one with the JTTF partners, including Boston Police Department and Mass State Police and some of the other partners. Boston Police Department was out there part of the surveillance last night and this morning. And then, as the commissioner said, there came a time whenever it was determined appropriate to approach the subject and interview him. So, thank you.
Commissioner, was he connected to ISIS, and was he planning to kill a police officer today? Was that his goal?
Again, we really can't comment on that. Again, that's part of the investigation. I think, working with the FBI and the Terrorist Task Force, we'll try to figure out actually. But obviously, there was enough information there that we thought it was appropriate to question him about his doings today. And that's when, sort of unprovoked, he came out with a knife. Our officers clearly retreated. And like I said, they did what they were trained to do. And I always say that's probably the most difficult decision we ever make, is when we have to discharge a firearm.
How dangerous was this man to the public? Was he a threat?
Well, we believed he was a threat. Obviously, like you know, FBI in charge of Boston here, Luis, I always say Lisi, sorry, Vince.
That's right.
You know, he was someone we were watching for quite a time. You know, constant dialogue between us and the FBI, and so the level of alarm brought us to question him today. I don't think anyone expected the reaction we were going to get out of him, and that's why we had the tragic turnout here.
Special Agent Lisi, we understand you've been tracking this gentleman and perhaps some others as part of an informal or ad hoc terror network for perhaps a couple of years, and that he was of late launching social media threats against police. Can you talk a little bit about that, and also about others that are part of this possible investigation? Are you planning to make other arrests?
Yeah, so I'm not going to comment on any aspects of this investigation as to how long it's been ongoing or any other aspects. I can tell you that our investigation is still ongoing. There's a lot more for us to do.
There are others?
So I'm not going to say that there are or there aren't others. All I'm saying is we have to make sure our investigation into this individual is thorough and complete, and it will continue until we're satisfied that you know, we've obtained all the information and evidence that there is to obtain. With regard to the one question regarding this subject, I would say that we considered him armed and dangerous. I would say that at that time he was considered to be armed and dangerous for the agents and the officers' safety, but I can tell you right now that as we sit back, we don't think that there's any concern for public safety out there right now.
Can you tell us about the other scenes that you have active right now, the one behind there? Was he coming from that area?
I'm not going to comment on any scenes or any aspects of the
Is there
investigation.
a second suspect under arrest in Everett?
I'm not going to comment on whether or not there is or isn't a second suspect or any other investigative activity.
When the officers approached him, what were their intentions? To ask him questions? Were they trying to arrest him? Was he doing anything wrong at the time?
It was to approach him and interview him and talk to him about his intentions and some other matters that concerned us.
Was he on the phone at the time?
So I'm not going to comment on what was
When
happening
you
at the
say
time.
question him, were you looking to take him into custody or just question him on the scene?
Question him on the scene. There was no arrest warrant for him, and there was no intention to arrest him at that point.
Was
The public
was
be
he in the
concerned,
middle
I
of
mean, we're
doing
just coming
something
out.
that caused you to want to question him at that time, or it was just an
I can't-
target of opportunity?
I can't get into why it was determined appropriate to approach him at that time and
Was
question
he
him.
about to conduct some kind of act?
So I can't get into any of that.
Final question,
Did he
please.
have a plan to behead a citizen or a law enforcement officer?
I'm not going to comment on what his plans were, weren't, may have been, could have been. Again, this investigation is still continuing.
Thank you, folks.
Thanks, everybody. Anybody needs to take additional video or images of the knife? It's going to be over here on the side.
Hi, you've been listening to a news conference taking place in Boston, a joint news conference between federal and local officials up there. There was a gentleman shot earlier this morning who was on a terror watch list. The officers that were on scene described that they approached this gentleman, identified as Usama Rahim. He is 26 years old, from the Rosendale section, which is about 6 miles southwest of the center of Boston. Officers say that they approached him. Rahim allegedly then came at them with a large military knife, which they actually showed at this news conference. And there is apparently video of the suspect then lunging at the two officers, who then shot him twice, once in the torso, another in the abdomen, and Usama Rahim did eventually die. We do not know why he was on a terror list. We do not know the background or the nationality of this suspect as of right now. Investigators were very tight-lipped about that, though asked several times. We will continue to take or follow this story for you, and when we get some new information, we'll be sure to pass it along.